weekend. And our next question comes from Rachel Lopez.
Hi. I have a 30-year-old brother who is an officer in the army, and he's going to be posted to Afghanistan within the next 12 months. When I speak to him, he doesn't seem to have any issues with going, and he just sees it as part of his job. But naturally, I'm very proud of him, but I'm worried. Do members of the panel believe that we should maintain troops in Afghanistan when we don't appear to be getting anywhere, and when local Afghans and Afghan National Army soldiers don't appear to want our assistance?
OK, this question coming off the back of the largest number of Australians killed and injured in a single incident since we've been there. Richard Gill, what do you think?
I am totally opposed to troops being anywhere. I'm opposed to war, obviously. I'm sustaining and maintaining that sort of thing. I do not understand. I have no comprehension of that. I'm quintessentially a pacifist, so the idea of sending people away to Afghanistan I find utterly extraordinary. I just don't. I understand defence, but I just think if there was no defence internationally, we'd probably be all better off. I just don't understand the
Presumably not during the Second World War, for example.
Well, Tony, I don't understand it. War, what do we learn from war? What does war teach us? The lessons are, war doesn't teach us anything. The thing is, the lesson we learn from history would appear to be we learn nothing from history. So we continually set out about destroying each other, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. So I don't know what sending troops to Afghanistan does. I'm not quite sure what it achieves.
Tanvir.
Well, I'll try and answer that. Like, I think, say, 10 years ago, after September, it made strategic sense that we had troops there because we had an alliance between the Taliban and who were housing al-Qaeda members, no less, Osama bin Laden and co, no less. So it made perfect sense to attack Afghanistan and neutralise that risk. But that strategic imperative seems weaker and weaker. So I feel for your brother going to Afghanistan, and I think many world leaders are beginning to recognise this. I mean, Hillary Clinton, too, did a press conference just on the weekend. She was in Pakistan. One of the biggest issues is we're trying to build Pakistan, and we've got a neighbour next door, Pakistan, who on one side is kind of, supporting us, but on another level are supporting our enemies as well. And this current attack, there's a view that it was funded by a particular group called Haqqani, which is a kind of new, relatively new terrorist group, if you like, who are well funded by the Pakistanis, according to a lot of research. So increasingly, what the strategic goals there are weaker and weaker, and whether the Taliban have much to do with al-Qaeda anymore, we know less and less, especially given Pakistan is probably a much bigger kettle of fish strategically. So I would say I think we should remove our troops. I think we should do it slowly. I don't think we can just leave a big mess. I think there's a lot of training to do with the security forces, and as you suggested, some of them aren't terribly excited about us being there. I think probably what makes sense is you do some sort of training almost in an outsourced way where they might be taken to a foreign base, say an American base, and we still attempt to train the troops to still try and help the country establish itself, but steadily remove our forces from danger, given that the strategic goals appear weaker and weaker.
Alan Asher.
Well, I think that the initial decision, I'd agree with Tanvir, to enter Afghanistan was probably an essential one, but it all went off the rails when the world was distracted itself with Iraq. People lost sight of what was happening in Afghanistan. The Taliban were allowed to regroup, and an opportunity, if was properly prosecuted back in those early days, may have led to a national army that was capable of looking after the country. There was a gap, and it's halting, and I think now faltering. But again, I'd agree with Tanvir that a tapered exit is the sensible thing, and I think the strategy of training is a good one, although, of course, the rapid growth in the Afghan army, many people say, is the problem. They just raked in pretty well anyone they could find without adequate security checks, and sadly now there seem to be embedded in the army numbers of people whose loyalty can't be guaranteed.
Rebecca, what do you think? I mean, it's tough, isn't it, to make any kind of argument to someone whose relative is about to go and they're very worried about them.
Well, I think your brother is a very brave man, and I'm very grateful that there are people like him who are prepared to join armies in countries like Australia that really do so much to defend the values that are so important. I'd say to Richard, you know, when you say that you don't know what does war serve, the Taliban is a country that wanted to abolish music. Not just some music, but all music. I mean, really, it's such an appalling regime. But I agree with, I think to some extent, the sentiment here of everybody that it's terrible to fight a war and at the same time have your so-called allies, like Pakistan, who are partly funding your enemies. We have a bipartisan agreement in the Parliament, leaving out the Greens, to fight and to leave the Afghan army in a condition where it can continue this fight, because it will take probably at least until 2020 to do it. And I think we can do that. But first of all, we actually have to believe that we can do it. You can't.
Like many wars Australia fights in, it's probably got more to do with the US alliance than any strategic goals of ours.
Okay, and briefly to Anne Summers.
I think I largely agree with Alan and Ashby. I think we all appreciate the efforts and the heroism of the Australian women and men who are fighting in Afghanistan, in the army and in the other services. But I do not agree with our political leaders anymore on this one. I think that it is time for us to think about moving out. I think apart from the arguments that have already been made by other panellists, I think one of the intrinsic difficulties of this war now, bearing in mind, of course, also that no Western power has ever succeeded in Afghanistan, ever. But one of the intrinsic difficulties now is that while we're fighting the Taliban, the Americans are engaged in secret negotiations with them. So it's very hard to sort of figure out exactly, you know, who we're fighting and why and what the point of it all is.
Okay, it's Q&A. It's live, it's interactive. Our next question tonight on a different